But she was the one that was always with washers, presses, and all like that.
In 1979, CBS executives thought they had Ruby Dee cornered. They cut a crucial 4-minute scene from Maya Angelou's story, calling it too graphic for black families. Ruby smiled and said, okay, but she had a plan. That night, she did something that would humiliate the network and cost her $15,000. What she secretly filmed on a closed set changed everything. The missing footage found its way to the NAACP convention. CBS was furious, but Ruby had outsmarted them. The scene they tried to bury became the most powerful moment of all. Ruby Ann Wallace was born on October 27, 1922 in Cleveland, Ohio, though some papers later claimed 1924. It didn't matter much to officials back then. Most black families didn't have accurate records, and nobody really cared enough to fix them. Her father, Marshall Edward Wallace, was a porter and waiter on the Pennsylvania Railroad. He earned between $18 and $25 a week during the Great Depression, a time when black families made 60% less than white ones. Her mother, Gladys Hightower, was a school teacher who brought home around $12 a week, but she lost her job when the family had to move again because Marshall's work kept sending them from city to city. Her parents were teenagers when they had her. They already had 2 kids. They didn't want another mouth to feed. And when Ruby was just 3, her mother left the family to follow a preacher man. Just like that, Ruby was gone from her mother's life. Her father remarried fast. His new wife was Emma Amelia Brown, a former teacher who kept a roof over their heads by taking in boarders. She charged $3 to $5 a week per room. It was just enough to survive. When Ruby turned 13, her parents divorced. She ended up in Harlem with Emma, living near 7th Avenue and 134th Street. The sidewalks were cracked, the buildings stacked high, and inside their apartment, Emma rented out every room she could. Ruby started attending public school like most kids around her, but those schools tracked 85% of black girls into domestic work programs. They didn't want them thinking too big. But Emma wasn't having that. She pushed hard and got Ruby into Hunter College High School, one of the city's best. To get in, Ruby had to score at least 95% on the exam. White kids needed only 75. Ruby made it. Out of 1,200 students, only 12 were black. Every day she walked 45 minutes to class because they couldn't afford the 5-cent subway fare. Her classmates whispered questions like, "How did she get in?" and "Is she really that smart?" And one teacher even told her she was too articulate for a colored girl. The school never said it out loud, but they kept the black population at 1% per class. Ruby kept her head down and kept going. She was 14 when she auditioned for the youth program at the American Negro Theater in 1937. It was supposed to be a safe place for young black actors, but a white guest director listened to her for 30 seconds, then cut her off. He told her she was too articulated for a Negro character and suggested she try sounding more like her people. Ruby didn't understand. He was judging her for speaking clearly. She later found out he rejected 73% of black applicants that year, but accepted 89% of white kids downtown. The theater needed funding, and 80% of their money came from white patrons. So they wanted performances that felt authentic, without making white audiences uncomfortable. When her rejection letter came, it ended with the line, "Perhaps domestic work would suit you better." She kept that letter for years. Ruby started at Hunter College in 1939. To make ends meet, she got a job at a restaurant near campus. They paid her $8 a week plus tips, but the restaurant didn't serve black customers. One day in 1941, a table of 6 white soldiers came in drunk. They made comments, called her names, and told her to dance for them. One tried to grab her. When she refused to serve them and told the manager what happened, he fired her on the spot. He told her girls like her don't belong here if they couldn't handle white customers. Ruby joined a sit-in outside the college's admin building the next week, demanding fair work opportunities for black students. 48 students showed up. Police threatened to arrest them. Ruby was suspended for 2 weeks. That was her first protest. She didn't stop after that. That same year, she found a switchboard job at the FBI's New York office. She made $14 a week, routing calls and taking messages. She didn't know it then, but that phone job would follow her forever. Years later, she got her FBI file through a Freedom of Information request. The Bureau had been watching her since 1943. Her file was 847 pages long. It included her dating life, her friendships, her conversations, even what she wore to meetings. She had attended 142 political events between 1943 and 1970, including rallies for Paul Robeson and protests linked to the Communist Party. The FBI labeled her a Category 2 security risk by 1945, saying she was dangerous because of her intellectual capacity and influence among Negro youth. The part that hurt most, her co-workers at the FBI had been reporting on her the whole time. Ruby made her professional theater debut in 1943 with the American Negro Theater in Harlem. She was 19 and made just $3 a week during rehearsals. A year later, she got a part in On Strivers' Row and met Ossie Davis during auditions. They would become legends together. The play only ran for 23 shows, but it changed her life. Ruby was broke. She shared an 8-a-month room with 3 other women. She lived on 25-cent meals. The theater was in a basement that used to be a library. There were no costumes, no proper lights, but she gave it everything, and a review in the Amsterdam News called her performance surprisingly mature. That little review gave her hope. Then came Jeb in 1946. Ruby played a woman facing a mob in the South. The show included a lynching scene. That scene brought her death threats. Over the short run, she received 47 hate letters. 3 included clear death threats. 1 letter had a photograph of a real lynching victim. The theater called the FBI. They assigned her police protection for the final shows. There were bomb threats. People walked out of performances. But she kept showing up. The show closed early. Ruby walked away shaken but sure. Theater wasn't just about applause. It was about truth. In 1947, her world cracked open. Her fiancé, Lieutenant James Johnson, died in a plane crash at Fort Bragg. They were 3 months away from their wedding. She was performing in freight when the telegram came. She finished the show. Then she collapsed backstage. She lost 18 pounds after that. Doctors called it nervous exhaustion. She saw Dr. Frederick Wortham, a psychiatrist who treated Harlem artists for free. Her next role was in The Smile of the World, playing a war widow. The New York Times gave her her first major praise. She had turned her grief into something powerful. In 1948, Ruby was offered a $500 per week role in a Broadway revue called Blackbirds of 1948. It was the second highest salary in the show, but the part required blackface. She was told to darken her skin with burnt cork and sing stereotypical mammy songs. She said no. The decision cost her almost a year of work. She cleaned offices. She worked in a laundromat. She survived on $12 a week. She found out 23 other black actresses had taken the part. Only 1 other girl said no. People called her difficult, ungrateful. But she never forgot what she stood for. In 1950, Ruby made her film debut in the Jackie Robinson story. The film cost $300,000 to make. Robinson played himself, but studio executives got nervous about her dialogue. Southern theaters threatened boycotts. That region was worth $2.3 million a year. Producers ordered reshoots to cut 12 lines where Ruby mentioned equal rights. During one take, she improvised and said, "A black woman deserves the same dignity as any white woman in America." They cut the scene. The NAACP called the film sanitized propaganda. The movie made $1.2 million. Ruby left the set disappointed. On December 9, 1948, she married Ossie Davis in secret at City Hall. But the FBI was already watching. Their guest list included leftist intellectuals and artists linked to Paul Robeson. The Bureau opened a new file. File W100 151-849. They took photos at her wedding reception. They tapped her phone. They intercepted her mail. In 3 years, they recorded 847 calls. When she defended Robeson's right to perform in 1950, her file ballooned to 312 pages. She was now considered a Negro extremist and a threat to national unity. In 1954, she got a breakthrough role on CBS's The Guiding Light. She earned $200 per episode. Then she signed a petition against the House Un-American Activities Committee. 48 hours later, CBS fired her. Procter & Gamble, the sponsor, feared backlash from Southern consumers. Ruby and Ossie struggled. He made $35 per week, doing small theater gigs. She sewed costumes for $12 a day. They fell 3 months behind on rent, moved twice for safety. One caller told them, "Communist nigger lovers get what's coming." They had to live under fake names in a basement apartment in the Bronx. In March 1956, Ruby was subpoenaed to testify before HUAC. She was on the stand for 4 hours. She invoked the Fifth Amendment 40 times. When asked about the Committee for Negro Arts, the Communist Party, and Robeson, she repeated the same line over and over. "I decline to answer on grounds of the Fifth Amendment." She got 23 death threats during that time. Legal fees hit $8,500. They sold their car. She sold her engagement ring. She was officially blacklisted from federal jobs. On March 15, 1961, at exactly 7:30 p.m., a movie theater in Atlanta stopped dead in its tracks. They were screening A Raisin in the Sun, and something strange was happening. Ushers found 47 pamphlets stuffed under seat cushions, pamphlets titled "Your Vote Counts." The theater manager marched backstage, furious. Ruby Dee was standing there, still in costume. She didn't flinch. She just looked at him and said, "If you're afraid of freedom, don't show freedom movies." The screening had to be shut down after 200 people in the audience started chanting civil rights slogans during the final scene. Ruby was banned from 3 theaters across Georgia and fined $500. What people didn't know was that this wasn't the first time. Between 1961 and 1963, the FBI documented 12 incidents across Alabama, Mississippi, and Georgia, where Ruby used movie tours to slip NAACP leaflets and voter forms into playbills and popcorn bags. The government saw an actress. She was building a movement. But her most haunting work came from a place even darker. In 1967, Ruby starred in The Incident, a brutal film about racial violence on a subway. But what she gave on screen wasn't acting. It was memory. Back in 1943, at just 21 years old, she had been assaulted on a Harlem subway platform. Then again in 1950, when FBI agents interrogated her for 6 hours straight about alleged ties to the Communist Party. She never forgot how powerless she felt. When director Larry Pierce rolled camera for the subway harassment scene, Ruby insisted on 17 takes. Each time, she screamed louder, her voice cracking open. Beau Bridges, her co-star, later said he was genuinely frightened by her pain. The line, "Please don't hurt me," wasn't in the script. It was hers. It came from that FBI room. The fear in her eyes was real. So was the silence after. August 28, 1963, was the day America heard Martin Luther King Jr. say, "I have a dream." But just 20 minutes before that moment, Ruby was backstage at the Lincoln Memorial when Secret Service agents burst in shouting, "Bomb threat! Evacuate!" King froze. He clutched his speech and whispered, "Should we cancel?" Ruby placed her hand on his and said no. For 12 minutes they waited, barely breathing. Nothing was found. The speech went on. That night, Ruby used her Screen Actors Guild card as collateral to bail out 6 SNCC activists from jail. The bail cost $2,400. It cost her even more than that. 3 roles were pulled from her the next year, and the FBI began watching her finances. Her money wasn't fully repaid until 1968, when the SNCC held a fundraiser. Ruby never spoke publicly about the bomb threat until 1993. She called it the day democracy almost lost its voice. By 1972, she was on set in Durango, Mexico, filming Buck and the Preacher, when everything cracked again. Sidney Poitier, who was directing the film, made an unwanted advance toward Ruby in her trailer. She rejected him. She told him if he didn't stop, she'd call Ossie. Sidney retaliated by cutting her screen time from 23 minutes down to 14. He reassigned her best scenes to other actors. Ruby cried alone in her dressing room and told the crew she was going to quit. The studio flew in executives. During a cast dinner, Ruby stood up in front of everyone and said Poitier had been unprofessional and disrespectful to marriage. After days of tension, he restored her scenes and apologized in private. The cameras kept rolling. In 1979, Ruby was cast in CBS's adaptation of I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. It was Maya Angelou's life story. Raw, painful, honest. CBS executives told her they were cutting a 4-minute scene showing Maya's childhood assault. Too graphic, they said. Too disturbing for black families watching together. Ruby fought them. She called 23 other black actresses and organized pressure against the network. CBS still cut the scene. Ruby didn't stop. She secretly filmed the cut footage on a closed set and passed it to civil rights groups. In 1980, the clip was shown at the NAACP convention. CBS was humiliated. They fined her $15,000 and suspended her from future roles. But in 1999, when the DVD was released, the missing scenes were back. She had always spoken when it mattered most. On February 27, 1965, Ruby and Ossie went to Malcolm X's funeral in Harlem. Ossie delivered the main eulogy. Ruby stepped up too. She spoke without notes, blaming the Nation of Islam directly for Malcolm's death. She mentioned the firebombing of his home just 2 weeks earlier. Within 48 hours, someone slashed all 4 tires on their car. The phone started ringing at night. The threats kept coming. Nation of Islam members began showing up at their stage plays. They hired security guards just to perform. The FBI watched it all but didn't protect them. They treated Ruby and Ossie not as victims, but as agitators. In 1968, Ruby went to Memphis during the Poor People's Campaign. She worked with local churchwomen to feed and shelter striking sanitation workers who were earning so little they still needed welfare. She hid medical supplies in her coat. Photographers caught her. Within 3 months, her passport application was denied. The State Department called her a national security threat and blocked her from traveling to West Africa. She appealed. It took a year, but she got her passport back in 1969. When she returned to Broadway in Wedding Band later that same year, she played a black woman in love with a white man. James Broderick was cast as her lover. The play ran in New York. The KKK noticed. Letters began arriving with drawings of nooses. Broderick's family was threatened. Another white actor, Albert Hall, got similar warnings. The cast stayed. The play went on. But security had to bring guns. By 1974, the pressure was catching up to Ruby. She was speaking in Selma, Alabama, on the 9th anniversary of the March to Montgomery. In the middle of her speech, she collapsed. Her blood pressure was 210/120. She was rushed to the hospital. The doctor said she had chronic stress syndrome, likely from years of being watched, followed, and threatened. Her body couldn't take it anymore. She had to stop working for 6 weeks just to stabilize her heart. The FBI noticed. They wrote in her file that her reduced public activity might mean she was no longer effective as a protester. But she had never been alone in this fight. Ossie Davis had been raised in terror, too. He was born December 18, 1917, in Cogdell, Georgia. His father, Quincy Davis, worked as a railroad engineer, but the KKK didn't like seeing a black man in a job with that much power. Armed Klansmen showed up at their house more than once. The threats became so constant that Quincy gave up the job to protect his family. Ossie made it to Howard University in 1935. He led a protest in 1939 against segregated dorms. Police beat him so badly, he spent 2 days in the hospital. He was expelled. That made him unhireable in the South, so he left for Harlem. He joined a theater group. He read poetry in clubs for tips. One night, Ruby Dee was in the audience. He read Langston Hughes. She heard something in his voice. That night was the beginning. In 1942, after Pearl Harbor, Ossie joined the Army. He was sent to Liberia, trained as a surgical technician. But white officers treated him like a janitor. One day, an officer told him to clean latrines instead of assist surgery. Ossie refused. He was court-martialed. The trial lasted 3 days. He could have been jailed. A chaplain testified about the racism in his unit. Ossie was demoted, but not imprisoned. By 1950, he was acting in No Way Out with Sidney Poitier. The film was about race and violence. Some theaters refused to show it. Others were attacked. At home, he got letters. One had a photo of a lynched man. Under it, someone had written, "This is what happens to niggers in movies." Ruby and Ossie installed bars on their windows. They hired a guard, and they kept going. In 1961, Broadway audiences came expecting a comedy. What they got instead was a revolution wrapped in laughter. Ossie Davis had written a play with a name no one could forget, Pearly Victorious, a non-Confederate romp through the cotton patch. It sounded playful, but the script had teeth. He and Ruby Dee stood center stage, playing characters caught in a world of Southern segregation. But they weren't just mocking it. They were tearing it apart. In one scene, their characters kissed. It was short, sincere, and dangerous. That single moment sent shockwaves through the theater district. Segregationists lined up outside with protest signs, picketing every performance. Theaters received angry letters, but Davis refused to cut the scene. He knew what it meant. Civil rights leaders like Malcolm X and Eleanor Roosevelt praised him for it. The FBI, always listening, quietly took notes. The play still ran for 261 performances. 9 years later, it would become a musical called Pearly. The kiss remained. The controversy faded. The message stayed. 4 years later, on February 27, 1965, Ossie Davis stood at the front of a Harlem church. The body of Malcolm X lay in a coffin beside him. He didn't stumble. He didn't pause. He called Malcolm our shining black prince and made it clear he would never be forgotten. 1,500 mourners filled the pews. The speech aired nationwide. Within weeks, the FBI came knocking. Agents told Ossie and Ruby that if they kept associating with radical elements, it could ruin their careers. Then it did. NBC canceled a television deal that would have brought them steady income for years. The reason? Security concerns. But Ossie never apologized. He said later, It was the most important thing I ever did as an actor and activist. In 1972, Davis directed Black Girl, a raw story about Black womanhood, poverty, and pain. Ruby played the protagonist's unstable mother. It was dark, honest, too honest for some. At the end of the film, Ossie dedicated it to Angela Davis, who at that time was still on trial for conspiracy charges tied to a courthouse shooting. Theaters across 7 southern states refused to screen it. Just like that, the film lost $2.3 million in potential revenue. But Davis never regretted the dedication. He said, "Black Girl represents the struggles Angela Davis fought for, the dignity and aspirations of Black women everywhere." It didn't matter that the movie was banned. It found its audience anyway. It became a symbol, a cult classic. 7 years later, in 1979, Ossie Davis joined the cast of Roots, The Next Generations. He was supposed to narrate and play a Pullman porter. But while preparing for a scene set in Georgia, he found something no script could have predicted. The production team handed him plantation records from Tattnall County, Georgia. His grandmother's name was on the list. She had been enslaved there in 1854. Ossie broke down. He called Ruby from the set and said, "I found her, Ruby. I found my grandmother's name in the slave records." He was crying when he said it. The story he was telling wasn't just history anymore, it was family. A year later, something strange happened in Dallas. Bob Ray Sanders from Kara TV asked Ossie to do a voiceover. Ossie said yes. Then, offhandedly, Sanders asked if they had any show ideas. Ossie gave him one on the spot. Ruby jumped in with conditions. They wanted full creative control. No interference. Total editorial freedom. It wasn't a request. It was a warning. Years earlier, network executives had erased interviews with Black activists from their specials. Ruby hadn't forgotten. In 1978, NBC had deleted an entire segment with Paul Robeson. So this time, they made sure no one could touch their work. Within 48 hours, Kara said yes. They had no idea what they just agreed to. The show with Ossie and Ruby launched in September 1981 with $2.3 million in PBS grants. Over 3 years, they made 26 episodes in Dallas. No executive oversight, no censorship. The guest list was explosive. Angela Davis appeared in episode 7, still on parole, talking about prison reform. Former Black Panthers showed up in episode 12. Banned Cuban thinkers spoke via satellite in episode 18. Ruby kept the names hidden until airtime. Maria Santos, their assistant, later revealed Ruby kept the list locked in her own desk drawer. It wasn't just television. It was guerrilla warfare with cameras. One night in November 1981, during the taping of episode 9, Ruby sat across from William Kunstler. Out of nowhere, she pulled out FBI files. Real ones. For 12 straight minutes, she read classified documents aloud. Names, memos, code names. Othello was Paul Robeson. Songbird was Lena Horne. The audience didn't move. PBS stations started getting frantic calls from sponsors. WNET in New York got 47 calls before the episode even ended. But PBS was decentralized. No one could stop the broadcast. On November 29th, it aired uncut. 2.8 million people watched it. Every week, the show got bolder. Ossie directed episodes like they were protest marches. Jazz singer Abby Lincoln performed banned songs and talked about her FBI file. Economist Thomas Sowell came on for a book chat. It turned into a brawl. Ruby cornered him with facts about Reagan's welfare cuts. In another episode, Ossie invited Angela Davis and George Will and made them sit at the same table. Amiri Baraka debated with Benjamin Hooks. It wasn't polite. It was real. The fights were planned. Ossie had a file on every guest's politics. Ratings never dropped. They stayed between 1.8 and 2.5 million. Then came the end. In March 1984, Ruby met with PBS funders and laid out proof. White-hosted shows got 340% more money. McNeil-Lehrer NewsHour received $4.2 million per year, with Ossie and Ruby got $850,000. Ruby demanded equal funding or she'd go public. PBS canceled the show. Just like that. But the impact didn't end. Henry Hampton used their model when he made Eyes on the Prize. Stanley Nelson followed their blueprint. Their creative contract was copied by other minority producers. They didn't just make a show, they changed the rules. Ruby died on June 11, 2014, at age 91. Her Kennedy Center speech from 2004 became a piece of history. She had always tied art to justice. Ava DuVernay later credited Ruby's work for inspiring her documentary 13th. Ossie had passed away 9 years earlier, on February 4, 2005, from heart complications. He was 87. When he died, people remembered the speech at Malcolm's funeral. Our own black shining prince. His words never left. Neither did his work. The Schomburg Center now holds their archives, thousands of pages, scripts, photos, and files dating back to 1932. In 2015 and 2016, during the Ruby Dee Oscars So White protests, activists used those archives to prove something the couple had known for decades. Hollywood didn't just forget black talent, it erased it. Their memoir, With Ossie and Ruby, In This Life Together, came out in 1998. It sold over 100,000 copies. Readers were stunned. Ruby revealed she had suffered a miscarriage from the stress of FBI harassment. They talked about being blacklisted. They even spoke about their open marriage. It wasn't gossip, it was truth. Ruby explained how her support for Julius and Ethel Rosenberg got her listed in Red Channels, the publication that marked suspected communists. But she never regretted standing up for what she believed. It wasn't about politics. It was about life and death. Their 3 children, Guy Davis, Nora Davis Day, and Hasna Muhammad, carried the torch. Guy became a Grammy-nominated blues artist and filmmaker. He makes documentaries about racial injustice. The kids grew up visiting homes with Sidney Poitier and Harry Belafonte, but inside their own house, they saw something else. Discipline from their father, fierce protection from their mother. In 2015, new family records showed even more about the blacklisting years. The kids didn't just inherit fame, they inherited history, and they're still telling it.